All right, here we go. Thanks again to all of the CISOs here that are participating in the panel. We had a really good prep call yesterday, so I'm really excited for what the conversation is going to be. I want to remind everybody in the audience to put your questions in the chat, and we'll bring you into the conversation this way. There won't be a Q&A at the end, official Q&A at the end. So without further ado, let's get everybody introduced. So Gary, let's hear from you. If you could tell people what your role is, where you work, and where you're located.
Certainly, and thanks for having me be a part of the panel. So I'm Gary Gooden. I'm the CTO and CISO for Seattle Children's. So I'm in this converged role called a CTSO. Seattle Children's Health System is a multi-state health system in the Pacific Northwest. One of the largest pediatric clinical and research entities in the country. I reside both in Seattle and in Los Angeles, and I'm currently sitting in Los Angeles for this session.
Very good, and that's one of the advantages of being virtual. So let's go to David.
Hello, everybody. Appreciate the opportunity to be here today. Looking forward to this great conversation. I'm David Levine. I'm the Chief Security Officer for Ricoh USA. I've got broad responsibility for cybersecurity, physical security, trade compliance, a couple other small areas, and I lead Ricoh's global security team. I am based out of Atlanta. My team is generally pretty distributed, and our U.S. headquarters is actually out of Pennsylvania.
Very good. Okay, Kevin.
Hi, everyone. It's great to be here. My name is Kevin Paige. I'm the Chief Security Officer at Flexport. Flexport is a company whose goal is to make global trade easy. And making global trade easy, we provide technology and services that are focused on freight forwarding, that are focused on customs, import, export, and focus on other trade services business like insuring goods and really helping goods move around the world. I'm sitting here, obviously in San Francisco by the background, just sitting here by the Golden Gate Bridge, hanging out in this beautiful weather we have today. But I actually am in the Bay Area, and Flexport based in the Bay Area, but a large global presence since we are helping customers move their goods around the world. So we have a presence in lots of the main countries where we need to move those goods.
Very good. Thank you. Yeah, it's great. You can tell that we've got many different industries represented. So I think we're going to have a good discussion around the cybercrime revolution. As you know, it's a great time to be a cyber criminal. They're definitely organized, well-funded, and making millions. Arguably one of the biggest innovators in technology these days. It's amazing to even be able to say that, but you in the audience and the panel definitely fighting a cybercrime revolution. So today we're going to talk about how the landscape has changed and what these folks here on the panel are doing to fight these cyber criminals. So let's start. I'm going to start with you, David, and talk about how the threat landscape has changed, what you've seen over, such big change even in the last year, but what have you experienced?
Yeah, definitely. Great question to get us kicked off. And I think, there's a couple of different areas where we've seen, some either just big shifts or just huge increases in the type of things we're dealing with. And so the obvious thing probably top of everyone's mind is ransomware. You can't ignore it. It's pervasive these days. Certainly, we've seen a dramatic increase with some of our customers, and just in talking to all my peers that it's just not going away. And to your point, the problem is the adversary is in many cases well funded, highly networked. And as we always say, they have to get it right occasionally. We have to get it right all the time. And so it's an uneven battlefield and has been for a long time. But, the ransomware is not going anywhere. And, we've seen the shift from just standard ransomware to now double extortion ransomware that's been out for a while. And so, the encryption is, of course, the last thing the adversary is doing. We tend to focus on that, but it's the last thing the adversary does on the way out the door. They've already infiltrated your network. They've already stolen your data. And so the impact can be devastating. And in many cases, they're destroying your backups on the way out too, to put you in a position where you have no other choice but to pay the ransom and then just hope that the decryption works. So, that's top of mind in just about every conversation I have, just not only internally, but with my peers, other CISOs. So can't ignore that. We could probably have a whole hour-long discussion just on ransomware if we wanted to. But I think the other big shift that we've seen, certainly in the last, 12, 20 months, give or take, is what we're dealing with the pandemic. And, we took lots and lots of people that in a lot of cases weren't used to working at home and sent them all home, and we did it overnight. So I think, what you now have is a situation where we've got a lot of unintentional insider threats, right? So you've always got the intentional insider threat. Those folks always exist, unfortunately. But now you've just got a whole lot of people that may be doing things that they don't even realize are risky. They don't have the same tool sets available to them in their home environments. They may not even have dedicated workspaces. And not to mention, kind of the obvious, your home network is not likely anywhere near as secure as your corporate network. So all of this stuff kind of all swirls together. So said a lot there, but I think, the summary is ransomware isn't going away. And, now we've got the whole remote and probably partially remote hybrid in the foreseeable future for a long time.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, we did a whole series on ransomware, or an event on ransomware in CISO Street in July. And it was, well attended, extremely popular topic. And it's interesting to see how even, some of the ransom that's been paid has come back. And I think one company even hired one of the hackers. I mean, it's just crazy what's happening right now. So it'll be interesting to see where it goes in the next 12 months. Gary, let's hear from you on how you see the threat landscape changing.
Well, it's kind of hard to follow him based on what David just said, because he essentially encapsulates the problem in almost its entirety. Being a part of a healthcare system, obviously when COVID became what it was in March of 2020, and people dispersed, as it were, we had to literally pivot to this remote work situation. And sometimes I'll tell people that COVID actually works in IT. And I say that because it essentially created a situation where a lot of the technology initiatives that may, for example, have been on the back burner or may have had funding related issues, suddenly all got prioritized. And so if you look at the rate of change in technology in the past, whatever it is, 15 plus months or so, it's almost been exponential relative to the past several years prior to COVID. So that to me is a positive uptick on what's a really unfortunate situation. But it just goes to show that, if you look at even work productivity, for example, it just goes to show that people can actually do what they need to do for the most part, not sitting in the in the walls of an office building per se. So for us, we had to pivot, and we actually have a remote work program which is split three ways. We have a percentage of our workforce based on their job roles that are 100% remote. We even hire employees from other states. They never actually come on site or into any of our facilities because their job role doesn't require it. And then we have the hybrid workforce, as am I, who are hybrid. They come on site maybe 1 or 2 days a week, depending on where they are and depending on what the need is. And then obviously, because there's a clinical and research requirement, there are a percentage of the population which are 100% on site. So that was actually intentionally done since the pandemic struck. So that process and that model is now in place as a permanent fixture of the Seattle Children's landscape. And then consequently, everything that David said are things that we have to attend to, and then we have had to pivot our infrastructure to account for it. But to account for it in a way in which that we actually have the kind of security levels and controls that may not have been there through traditional means of remote connectivity. So didn't want to repeat what David said, I just kind of wanted to write on top of it.
Yeah, definitely a big change in due to COVID, obviously, and we have all become much more efficient working from home, more so than we ever thought we would. So, that's one of the silver lining out of it, that we are able to work from home quite easily. But securing it and getting that perimeter and landscape, identified is not so easy to keep everybody safe. So, Kevin, let's hear from you, and then I'm going to go around and ask everybody to talk just a little bit about how you are going about identifying and monitoring the perimeter. Kevin.
Yeah, definitely. I think Gary and David made some amazing points on the threat landscape and things that we need to think about. And I think that as we think about the threat landscape, I think we need to start with the landscape and look at the changes in the landscape. I think everybody's using more third parties than ever before. I think everybody is using cloud services more and more. People are depending on SaaS services more and more. Everything isn't contained behind a firewall anymore. I think that lots of people are pivoting and doing various activities due to remote work, just due to different types of companies that now exist. Companies are trying to move quicker and faster and be more efficient due to the technology capabilities that are out there. And a lot of times security isn't at the forefront of the mind when people are trying to move quickly. And I think a lot of times not having security at the forefront of the mind, increases risk before the company or before maybe the teams are ready to deal with those particular risks. And I think that, when we start looking at cloud and we start looking at all these third-party software, third-party tools, third-party SDKs, cloud environments, we really have to shift the way we think in order to deal with this new landscape. We have to really think about, secure by design when we're designing how we're going to do things, whether it's a people problem, a process problem, or a technology problem. We really have to make sure that we're really putting security first, and we're taking a new ways in which we deal with security. I like to say that, in this remote world, and that everybody could be anywhere at any given time, security, we have to really think about, kind of a strategy where security, kind of has a couple different pillars. I like to say, like, the security needs to be constant. And being constant, it's an always on service that needs to be kind of unrelenting in the face of continual change. Security's also got to be omnipresent. It's got to be available and compliant and secure everywhere. I think that David mentioned, right, we have to protect against all the things all the time. A bad guy or somebody trying to expose you only has to find one thing one time. And it needs to be adaptable. Businesses are going to change, things are going to change, and security has got to be in the front and be able to be adaptable and change with things and how they change. We need to get ahead of the issues that cause ransomware. We need to get ahead of the issues that cause a lot of things, and really invest in threat intel. Get out there, see what's happening on whichever the dark webs, deep webs, social media. There's all kinds of different threat vectors out there these days, and social media, the cloud, technology is really pushing them. And as security professionals and technology professionals, I really think we just need to get ahead of it. We have to understand the landscape, understand how it's changing, watch the threats, and then adapt. And I think that watching the technology evolve, that's pushing the landscape. And obviously, with more people remote and more people using SaaS services, it makes it easier for the threat actors that want to make money with either selling 0 days or getting ransomware attacks on systems and on people who aren't used to working in a remote world. So the threat landscape changing dramatically, based on how technology is changing and how the world's evolving. So some of my thoughts.
Very good. I'm going to go back to David, and if you could talk about what you're doing at Ricoh to identify the landscape and the perimeter.
Yeah, and so Kevin, a lot of great points and really touched on a lot of it. But it's interesting because we've talked for years and years around you have to know your assets, you have to know where your data is, and that was a challenge even when everything was within our four walls, right? I mean, we it was always difficult, but now the perimeter is all over the place. and it's tough to try and figure out what that perimeter exactly is for all the reasons Kevin mentioned. So, I've said this a lot, but the greatest thing about the cloud is it's really easy to get into, but the worst thing about the cloud is it's really easy to get into. And so whether it's shadow IT or employees just thinking they're doing the right thing, I mean, all they got to do is pull out a credit card and sign up and off they go. And surprisingly, in some cases, they're not even trying to build a company for it. They're just trying to use whatever they can use. If they are routing it through the company, one thing that's effective is you can team up with finance and make sure you got the right financial controls in place. So if something pops up that someone's trying to expense that they shouldn't, a cloud offering or whatever happens to be, you can catch it, but that's only part of it. One example we've seen is, employees going out and say signing up for one of the survey solutions or storage solutions, and they're not even attempting to build a company. But the problem with that is you have no idea what data is going out the door, who they're surveying, what they're asking, and you have absolutely no rights or controls to that data at all. So that makes the perimeter, really difficult. So, as Kevin pointed out, you've got rapid digital transformation. So, IT security trying to catch up and get out in front of it with the right controls in place. But that makes all of these kinds of things, much, much more difficult. So the perimeter is ever changing. There are tools, certainly there are tools, to help with all this. But like everything else, it requires investment and time and tweaking and consuming that information and doing the right thing with it. So, I think, again, there are things that can help. You talk about the threat landscape, and, I'll go back to that. And I mentioned the unintentional insider. Think about how many breaches, too, are a result of just misconfiguration. And that, is a huge problem in the cloud. And it's not that people are trying to do the wrong thing. They just don't know, or they make an honest mistake. And so, looking for tools that monitor cloud configuration, things like that, definitely become an important, arrow in your quiver of tools to try and control this. But yeah, you've definitely got an ever expanding perimeter. And then the whole, again, work at home piece. So remote piece. Again, you've got all kinds of situations going on in a home environment. In my case here, I'm sitting in a dedicated home office, which helps, but that's not always the case with folks. You got to think about things like Alexa. Do you have Alexa within earshot of your work conversation? Maybe not a great idea, right? How many employees, again, unintentional, go set up their home network, but they don't really know, did they even change the admin password on the Wi-Fi router they bought at the big box store? That's a problem. Again, there are some tools and things you can do to help all of that, but it's definitely changed. Where are people? Ricoh, people tend to think of printing, right? Although we do a lot more than that, but think about printing. I mean, you're in your home office. Where are you printing to? And what are you doing with those documents even after you printed them? You may or may not have a shredder. You certainly don't have a shredding company, more than likely, showing up at your home. So you've got data leakage there that could potentially happen. We've seen all kinds of stuff, either, firsthand or through my peers of, people sharing equipment at home, just all kinds of nutty stuff. So I think, again, the perimeter was difficult when it was in four walls. It's now way more difficult because it's all over the place globally.
Yeah, it's very true. I know when I spoke to Gary, when we had an intro call, I remember you telling me a lot of the innovation that you're doing at Seattle Children's, and it was very impressive. So I'm interested to hear your information, tidbits of information as we go through the conversation. But talk to us about what you're doing to identify the perimeter and protect the organization.
Well, as David alluded to it, and Kevin said it as well, the perimeter is gone as we know it. Right? There is no such thing as the data center centric version of the universe anymore. It's really about distributed infrastructure, and distributed infrastructure, distributed users, distributed personal practices. It's all distributed, which is just magnify the problem. So one of the things that we started to do back at the beginning of 2020 is really start the process of going on this journey, this zero trust journey. And it's more of a philosophical thing for us as it relates to one homework question. Homework question is as follows. What is the end user true North Star? In the sense that what, from a technology perspective, should be the true North Star in terms of the end user experience? And from our perspective, the North Star for the end user experience should be a fantastic experience. But a fantastic experience in a clinical/research space means speed, it means flexibility, and speed and flexibility sometimes don't necessarily interact really well with security. It's like driving on the freeway and then hitting a puddle of water, right? So hence the zero trust philosophy of saying, okay, well, then we lead with security. Use security as a tool for innovation, not as a tool to inhibit. And so it really has to do with zero trust and the frictionless application of zero trust. So for instance, security attestation in the cloud is a big component piece. For us, the whole idea of doing health checks on endpoints prior to connecting is a big deal for us. So secure web technology is critical for us as we pivot away from traditional things like VPN and remote connections through things like Citrix, for argument's sake. And on top of that, you look at other social issues, like, say, for example, we talked about users who might be printing remotely. And if you print remotely, then you need to have a shredder. So we make it so that there is a proviso for them to have shredders. Why? Because you don't want to have dumpster diving. But again, even if you lead with zero trust as a philosophy, then what you're really doing is that you're taking technology, taking security, and pushing it down to the entity, the actual individual. So everything becomes role-based and entity-based. So you, as a consumer, the end user, is now the security engine. Everything else ascribed to you is just an entitlement, but it's an entitlement of a device, entitlement of a service based on your role. And so the security paradigm is now personal. So we're building the technology around the person. And so it's for lack of a better term, it's almost like a master-slave relationship. That's a big driver. And then the other thing is, I think Kevin alluded to it, or is it David? We talked about cost. Right? It's one thing to then have COVID be an accelerator for innovation relative to investment in technology and technology infrastructure and security. I see that's one thing, which is why I'm in this converged role. But it's also another thing to think about ongoing investments as the threat landscape continues to morph and change almost on an exponential basis. Otherwise, it just becomes another static thing that you did. And in order to do so, you really have to then focus on cost innovation models. And so you're talking about closer working with finance, working with your board, getting the point across. So you always have that kind of support. Relative to the huge expansion into cloud supported services, in infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, specifically SaaS services. What we started doing was put in place an intake process that ties into the contracting process for third-party contracts. So we can do attestation of third-party contracts before they're actually signed for services that might have something to do with technology. And then one of the things that we're going to do is eventually go back and do reconciliation of existing services as well. And then you can also do things like reverse proxies and do web crawling and what have you to try to find out where our data lives and to what extent that data is data that we care about. So those are some of the things that we have been doing. But again, it's all predicated on this notion of zero trust as a part of the journey and frictionless zero trust, which is not easy.
Yeah, exactly. I'm glad you brought up zero trust. It is one of the topics I'd like to have everybody kind of weigh in on. I know it's a philosophy, and I hear a lot of discussion around it. A lot of CISOs are grappling with it, trying to figure out how best to implement it. And I'd love to hear your thoughts on your approach to zero trust. So, Kevin, where do you stand on that?
Yeah, with zero trust, I think it's really important and really a critical aspect. It's also a critical aspect to really understand what it means, because I think a lot of people get tired of hearing it because it feels like a buzzword. You're like, oh, zero trust, it's a buzzword. Well, I mean, cloud's a buzzword, big data is a buzzword. Like, there's lots of buzzwords out there, right? So, and I think that the worry is about understanding what it means and what it means to you. And I look at it as just a different way of solving an old problem, right? There used to say, at least I know I used to say, a lot of people used to say, a very popular statement was trust but verify, right? So there's a default level of trust that you would give. We'll verify it later. We'll do some audits every quarter. We'll double check it, right? We'll just make sure things are in place. And that strategy has not worked out very well for anybody, right? So the trust but verify doesn't work, right? So how do we take a secure by design approach? How do we make sure that we flip trust but verify upside down, and we don't trust anybody or anything at any given time unless the trust happens through some mechanism, right? Through some kind of policy-based access control, through some mechanism in which my identity, my system's identity, the system I'm going to connect to's identity are all validated, and making sure that me and my system from my house can connect to the thing that I need to connect to. And I think that a zero trust approach is exactly that. It is just a policy-driven way in which you are allowed to connect to things individually, and you're not allowed to connect to everything. I guess we could compare it to a traditional VPN approach potentially, right? When you connect to a VPN, you're on the network. You can do everything that you could do on the network. A zero trust approach to an access system would mean that if you have, if you can connect to a thing on a network, then you can connect to that one thing on that network. You can't connect to the whole network at one go. So that zero trust approach, I think it's very important in today's world. When we talked earlier, when we were talking about from a threat landscape perspective, how do we modernize? How do we adapt to be able to provide security and access to systems in this remote world, in this SaaS-based world? How do we do it? We do it via, one of the ways, and a great kind of philosophical way to do it is really thinking about zero trust, making sure that we really understand what people need access to, and we give them access to only the things they need access to, using the right kind of process and technology. Use as much context and metadata as we can to provide those capabilities. I think the term least privilege has always been an adage or in the security world, but it was always kind of hard to do and hard to implement. And I think that one of the great things with modern technology and cloud is that it gives us a lot of tools and capabilities to be able to implement some of the things that we've been talking about for 25 years in security, but never really been able to do very well. I think zero trust sums that stuff up, and allows us that capability. And I would just tell everybody, like, don't, worry about the marketing buzzwords. Of course, there's tons of cyber companies out there and lots of people that are trying to help, and lots of people trying to make money. But you just got to see through the fog and understand kind of what this approach is, and understand that it is an approach. It's, cloud is, could be lots of things, right? Could be infrastructure as a service, could be a SaaS service, could be lots of things. Zero trust also could be lots of things. It's kind of important to think about how it relates to your business, how it relates to you, how it relates to your threat landscape, and how you can deal with those types of problems. That's kind of my thoughts on zero trust.
Okay, great. David, why don't you let us know about where you stand on zero trust and how you're approaching it?
Okay, well, we have a great conversation already and great points. So, I certainly agree with everything that's been said so far, right? Zero trust in today's threat landscape makes sense, right? Again, we used to look at, the high, thick perimeter walls around the environment and just get people in securely and you were done. Well, we've dispensed with that a long time ago, with, adversaries almost certainly is going to be able to get in your environment if they're duly motivated and duly funded and skilled. And, that just changes things, and it's changed over time. You look again at ransomware, also consider, and this is, a key point too, is depending on which metric you look at, and they're all pretty close, it's anywhere from like 83 to 89% of every breach is a result of human error. So that's staggering if you think about it, 8 out of every 10. So how do you protect yourself against that? ZT, zero trust, is one way. It just makes sense. But I will say it is one of those things that is easier to say than do, for sure. And I think part of that is, people go, I don't know where to start. Where do we go? Well, I think you just have to start, period. And I would also argue that in a lot of cases, people are already on that path, whether they are intentionally or not. I mean, if you're doing MFA, that's a piece of that puzzle. But you got to look at your environment. You have to decide what makes the most sense for your environment. What are your top risks? And how do you apply some of those principles and just start doing it? I mean, don't try and boil the ocean, because it is a huge thing. If you've got a large, complex existing network that's fairly flat, and you need to look at segmentation or microsegmentation, which is a key tenet, that's going to be tough, and it's going to take time and energy and resources to work through. You need to do it, but it's going to take time. So, as you're looking at things like that, you also got to take a look at what are the other things I can do that are easier to implement, and again, are commensurate with the risk you're facing. So I suspect whether it changes names or what have you, that this philosophy will be around for a long time, because it just makes good sense. I mean, at the end of the day, what we're saying is just make sure people have access to what they need and only what they need, not more than that. And that just makes sense. So again, though, easy to say, not so easy to do.
Yeah, definitely. It's a long game, right? It's not an overnight, implementation or something like that, but definitely something you have to keep in mind as you put your risk management programs together. Let's talk a little bit more specifically about standards and frameworks. And the question is, why should you care about the standards and frameworks like CMMC and NIST? So let us know. There's a lot of acronym soup that is associated with standards and framework. But Gary, let's start with you.
Certainly. So from my perspective, and specifically because I sit within the healthcare environment, where compliance is a big deal, whether it's HIPAA compliance, whether it's PCI compliance, whether it's GXP compliance, because we also do manufacturing, whether it's government-related compliance related to things like FISMA or FedRAMP. If you don't have a security framework within which to operate in, then you're essentially going to be lost. That's absolutely lost. And what I will tell people is, rather than looking at a plethora of frameworks, whether it's NIST, it's COBIT, whether it's HITRUST, just pick something. Pick a framework, map your controls to it that are relevant to your environment, and that's what you do. If you don't do that, then you will effectively not be able to have an effective, thoughtful, and actionable security program. So this is from our perspective, that's just a capstone reason why we need to have it. And then obviously there are regulatory requirements where you have to show proof that you've done certain things. So it's, apart from it being mandatory, it is logical if you're serious about actually running a security program. So that's how I would describe it at a very, very, very high level.
Okay. Oh, let me go. Yeah, here we go. David.
Yeah. So, definitely, agree with Gary's points. I mean, in some cases, you don't have a choice, right? It's mandated. In his case, healthcare, you've got certain things you got to do. If you're financial industry, there are other, frameworks you're going to have to do. It's just entry into business or being in business. And I do think they're important. In our case, at Ricoh, we've got, certain business offerings and managed service offerings and things that we do that we're not getting those certifications, inherently because we have to have them, but in order for us to do work for our customers, we have to have them. So if we're going to handle, Gary's PCI data or Kevin's, regulated data, then in order for us to play in the space, we've got to do that. So they're important. It also I know when we're looking at third parties and we're doing evaluations, I'm certainly always looking to see, are they ISO certified? Are they following one of the other frameworks that make sense? And it's a red flag if they're not, because it speaks to a level of maturity and dedication, and even, I would say, to a point, even understanding of what needs to be done. I think the caveat, though, in all of that is none of that guarantees security, right? They're all important. They're good. I certainly wouldn't, I'm not trying to diminish or take away from their place, but, certifications and actual security are two different things. So we're always looking at both. But I like what Gary said, too, just pick one, because in some cases, it's certainly better to be doing something than not anything at all. And some are easier to do than others, right? FedRAMP and HITRUST are really, really difficult, long-term, arduous certifications to get through. And some of the other ones are a little easier, but no matter what you're doing, it's going to improve your security program, your maturity, your governance, and reduce your risk overall.
Very good. Kevin, let's hear from you on this topic.
Yeah, great points from David and Gary. I would say there's probably, I guess I'll summarize a little bit of what they said and add some color to it. There's probably two main reasons why, that you want to think about compliance standards, right? Security is a big thing, right? Like you have to have security in HR, you have to have security in technology, you have to have security in every facet of your business. So where do you start? And how do you know where to start, right? So, so one of the easiest ways to figure out where to start is to use a compliance standard, right? It's a great starting point when you're trying to figure out, where should I start? Why should I start there? And some of them have some risk frameworks baked into them, right? So not only can you figure out, what you're going to do, how you're going to do it, and you can help you prioritize by using some risk-based capabilities. And I'd say the other kind of, number one starting point, figure out like, what am I going to do? How am I going to do it? And maybe you need to prove that you do it to somebody too, right? Like we talked about third-party risk a little bit. So, hey, I need to prove to you that I do things based on a standard, and you understand that standard. I understand that standard. We both talk the same language, so I know that you're doing a minimum set of stuff, and that minimum set of stuff is okay. And I would say the second one is probably legal reasons, right? So I think we touched on it earlier. Nobody's usually securities, usually it costs money. It might slow things down sometimes because you actually have to think through what it is you're going to do before you do it. That's not something always business wants to do. I mean, we can look at, say Barnes-Oxley and some other things like SOX didn't come about because, the government was bored, right? Like there was some pretty nefarious activities that were happening in the world, via Enron and others, that caused that to happen. HIPAA, very similar. That's a law, right? And it didn't come about because people were bored and thought like, hey, HIPAA would be cool, right? It came about because people weren't prioritizing security, and they didn't think that the protection of data was that important. So somebody needed to make it important for them. And again, some of those mandates, or whether it's things like like those, or GDPR, or any of these types of compliance mechanisms, they're obviously can be interpreted in certain ways, right? And there's different levels of maturity in which you can implement those controls. But I would definitely use them as starting points, use them as ways in which you can communicate with other security leaders or other technology leaders on what and why you should do certain things, and to what level that you would do them. But I think that compliance standards in those frameworks, they're great starting points. Sometimes legally mandated, so you don't have a choice. But either way, it's a great standard to be able to communicate with, right? So when I say ISO 27001 and somebody else says ISO 27001, we know what we're talking about. We understand the controls structure. We understand what components are part of those particular control structure. Now, we don't know how good anybody's doing those controls. However, we do know that they understand, and we can start. It establishes a communication, and a similar vocabulary, so that we can start talking about security, and we can start talking about risk, and we're not just like sticking our finger in the air and being like, yeah, let's start here, right? Like it gives us a good mechanism for going.
Yeah, very good. And we're talking about something that is, structured standards, like communicating from the same page. It's really important. And switching gears to talking about vendor risk management programs, where when you're dealing with so many different vendors, it's not so standardized, and there's a lot of issues and concerns that come with that. So let's talk about the third-party risk management program, and I'm just going to go around to everybody, starting with David, and talk about what you're experiencing. I know at Ricoh, I'm sure you've got plenty of vendors that you're using in your supply chain and presenting a lot of risks. So how do you go about that? Just talk a little bit about kind of the process or the lack thereof.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. I hope we have another hour.
We've got 15 minutes.
Okay. What a train wreck. I mean, that's the short answer. Now, it really is, unfortunately, and it has been for a long time. And we, those of us, like, for example, on the call, talk about it a lot and commiserate a lot about it, but really not getting a lot better. And on top of that, we've got new threats coming in that supply chain attacks and things that we hadn't necessarily spent a ton of time thinking about, before now. But I think, unfortunately, third-party risk management, it's one of those things I think we all agree we have to do it. I mean, I have to have some way of gauging, the maturity of somebody I want to do business with or a solution I want to use. But unfortunately, the way we do it and the way we've been doing it is just not good and not very effective. And quite frankly, at times probably misleading. I mean, I'm sure Gary and Kevin will commiserate or weigh in, but I know in my case, we get ridiculous questionnaires and they only continue to get longer. And it's at the point where, is it a questionnaire or are you trying to take me through an entire audit? And what's worse is they're frequently terribly written. You can't actually answer them in a meaningful way that provides a real answer, right? So, we've gotten in all kinds of crazy discussions with third parties around their questionnaires or how they're answering ours. I mean, at the end of the day, what you want to do is gauge the security and governance of the solution you want to use. And, we get questionnaires too. For example, I mean, we're fortunate at Ricoh that we do a lot of different things. We have hardware, software, services, managed services, cloud offerings, on-site offerings. So we'll get a questionnaire and they'll ask a question and your choice is yes or no, period. Like, well, okay. The reality is the answer is yes for that, no for that, maybe for that, depending on how you configure it. Well, sort of with this, but only if you do that. But you can't do that. And so, you just, I don't know at the end of the day what you derive out of that sometimes. I'm not saying it's all flawed. I've seen some that are okay, but we don't have a good universal way of doing this yet today that everybody agrees to. And I think it's very problematic. And to add into that too, when you do have problems and you need to talk to somebody, in my experiences, it's not the security team that's giving you the questionnaire. It's an RFP team. It's a procurement team. They don't know. And in some cases, they don't care either. They just want it done. I'll add one more thing in, and then I'll turn it over. But the other thing we see too is sometimes companies have gone, I got it. I'm going to hire a third party to do it for me. Great. They're stepping aside, but guess what? You just made it even worse because now the third party is being, funded on getting this stuff done, and they really don't care, and they don't know either. And so, if you have a problem, and it happens all the time, and you actually need to talk to somebody to have a real conversation, it's extraordinarily difficult sometimes. And in my experiences, if I can finally battle my way through the red tape and I get to Kevin or I get to Gary and I go, hey, let's talk about this. You're asking this. Here's what's going on. Whatever the case is, 99% of the time, we're both going to walk away going, okay, got it. I'm good. Thank you. But we wasted a tremendous amount of time. So it's a very inefficient process today that's wrought with all kinds of errors. So I could keep going, but I'll get off my soapbox. Unmute.
I know, you know what? I never mute myself, but because there's some noise background. But anyway, yeah, I think that this is one area that we could really use standardization. Obviously, it would make the process so much easier. I'm going to go to Gary and have you talk about this area, and if you could also, talk about tools that types of tools that you use to implement a good vendor management program.
Well, I'll caveat by saying that I don't believe that there's any such thing as a good vendor management program. And specifically around third-party vendor risk management, to David's point, the word good doesn't apply. We talk about trust but verify. This is the antithesis of that, or rather, this is what it means, but in the most confused manual way possible. So we use several tools today in our environment, both manual tools and technical tools, and none of them actually do a good job. They just don't. And in many cases, to the point that David made, we literally end up talking to the security teams to cut through the clutter. The good thing is that we're really focusing on the human component meaning the process by which contracts are executed or derived prior to execution, and the insertion of security in the conversation relative to any contract. We have it at the technology level and to a certain extent at the business level. And now nothing really gets verified and or brought in if we don't have a technology or security oversight on that particular thing, whether it's a service, whether it's technology, whether it's a piece of equipment. It all touches the technology teams, and it touches it from a security perspective. That's more around manual checks and balances that we now have in place. Obviously, these things didn't really exist several years ago. So to the point that Kevin made earlier, yes, you'd have unfettered types of events occurring where you'd have services being spun up without any oversight whatsoever. Now we have a measure of oversight, but it still isn't an elegant process because, to your point, there is no standard per se that exists within the industry relative to how about going about third-party risk management and the tools around it. We will use other tools that will look at your external footprint to ascertain the security posture of the entity. We'll then also include language in the statement of work that suggests that you have to provide on an annual basis some sort of attestation about your presence or your current or your state. We don't do on-site inspections anymore. Why? Because we're still in a pandemic of sorts. So the whole idea of trust and verify is a big issue for us. Third-party risk management and also insider threat are two of the things that keep me up at night, and will be for the foreseeable future, because there's a lack of maturity, there's tremendous variability, and there's just a lack of process. So that's
I think those two areas are going to keep a lot of people up in the audience for the foreseeable future, for sure. All right, I'm going to go to Kevin to weigh in on the vendor management programs and the challenges around that, and the types of tools that you're using for an effective program. And then we've got about 8 minutes left, and I do want to spend a little bit of time, if we have it, on addressing cyber insurance. And which obviously doesn't do it justice, but I know because it's such a big thing right now. It's in flux and evolving. But Kevin, I'll go to you, and then we'll spend a few minutes on cyber insurance.
Sure. Yeah. Everybody touched on some great topics with third-party risk. I think one of the problems, I think we touched on this earlier, was that everybody's using so many different third parties for so many things. People are using third parties for things that are just absolutely critical to their business. And I think that one of the problems that we have, and maybe one of the things, is that people are trying to standardize something that can't be standardized the way we're trying to standardize it. It can't be standardized in a checklist, right? Like you can't create a one size fits all checklist that solves all the problems, right? So there's got to be a better way in order to do third party risk, right? Because it needs to be continuous. Like if you have somebody fill out a checklist one time, and every year they fill out a checklist. Every tech company's got a whole team of people that just fill out checklists, right? They're not even talking to the security team, not even kind of probably verifying or validating half the time the things that they're doing, unless it's some sort of a continuous process, right? So I really think that third party risk, like other things, has got to evolve, right? We have to figure out how do we create mechanisms in which the most important things, the reason why you're using that third party, you can zoom in, you can double click into that reason of what that third party is being used for, and then figure out what are the most important things to know, and then how do you find out when things change? Otherwise, we'll keep you doing the same things, right? I mean, I use tools, and I've got a tool that's focused on cost, how much we're paying for particular software and particular third party services. One of the ways how we prioritize how important it is by how much we pay for it, right? Not the only way, but one of the mechanisms that we use for it. We've got another vendor that I use that does some kind of continuous scorecarding based capabilities on the third party. Wrought with error, because they're trying to boil the ocean on all the things they're trying to look for, and half the things don't matter, but some of the things do matter. And then we've got some other tools that are focused on helping speed up the process, right? Like some OCR tools that can take a questionnaire and look at it, or just automatically spit out some of the very popular questionnaires that are out there, whether it's SIGs and SIG-Lights, and there's all these tools out there. Cloud Security Alliance has got one. There's a vendor security alliance as well that has some standardized questionnaires. So lots of standardized ways to do it. But at the end of the day, I think that what a lot of companies probably do is try to figure out at least what the most important things are. And that's what I try to do, figure out like, hey, where are the top 10 most important kind of third parties that we're dealing with? And let's really kind of zoom in on those and make sure those guys are really squared away with building partnerships with those particular third parties. If they're that important to our business and to our company, then it shouldn't just be a vendor that's hidden somewhere. Like we should really know them, really understand what they do, how they do it, what data is traversing, if any is, or what services are being consumed and how they're being consumed, and make sure that we've got a partnership and we understand big events, big changes, or issues, whether those issues are a partner, a vendor, a third party that just had a ransomware attack or had some other data breach or some other issue. How can we keep those conversations going, and know what the real issue was, know what the real things are, right, and not just read the press releases and have to be scared and worried and staying up at night. Like how do we not be scared? How do we figure out what the real problems are? And we have to figure out how to evolve that. But yeah, using probably the same tools or similar tools that everybody else is using. But I zoom in a little bit more on what kind of our P0, our priority zero third parties, and probably spend more time there than with the other 500 that we have, right? So, but yeah, some thoughts.
Yeah, I think it comes down to visibility, right? Not only just in where your perimeter is, the landscape, but who is all in your supply chain. And understanding that and where everything is. So we've just got a few more minutes, but talking about how things have changed, how these questionnaires have gotten longer. It's the same thing with cyber insurance, of what I understand. And I know, David, you're going through the process of just renewing your cyber insurance. So talk to us about what changes you've seen, and is it becoming prohibitive to obtain a policy?
Well, I think that's going to be a good question going forward. I mean, I can tell you that there was a huge shift in the last year from the last time we did our insurance. We used to get, fairly, limited, like 10, less than 20 questions that were fairly high level, just asking the very basic questions around your security program. And that's used to be all there was. This year we rolled in, and holy smokes, it was completely different. We got multiple in-depth questionnaires, and not only were they in-depth questionnaires, one was completely dedicated to ransomware, but they really paid attention to the answer. So they dug in. If they didn't like the answer, they came back 2 and 3 times and kept digging it. So they really got to whatever answer, either verified that they didn't like the answer or got to an answer they did like. And that was an extraordinarily shift in a very short time period. And, I would have to say it's got to all be predicated on the changing threat landscape specific to ransomware. They're in a tough position these days. And so they want to make sure if they're going to provide insurance to somebody. And, when you're talking companies of our sizes here, we could potentially be ransomed for tens of millions of dollars. That's a lot to take on from an insurance perspective. So they're doing everything they can to make sure they should be covering you. And I think, unfortunately, unless something changes, we're going to keep seeing more and more of that. So it'll be interesting to see where the cyber insurance industry goes.
Yeah, very much so. I think, because I run panels on CISO Street, I'm going to do one just dedicated to cyber insurance, so we can spend a little bit more time than what we've got right now. Basically, have just a couple more minutes. So, Kevin, what are your thoughts? And then we'll close out. Unfortunately, Gary had to drop off for another urgent meeting, so we'll finish out with Kevin.
I'm still here.
Oh, you're still there. Oh, awesome. Oh, sorry. Okay, I thought you had to go. There you are. Okay. Great. Kevin.
Cool. Yeah. I'm also in the process of doing my annual renewal for cyber insurance. So, and a very similar thing, normally it was not even a full questionnaire, like a partial questionnaire with like 4 very generic questions in there that we would just, answer in minutes. But now I had 4 different questionnaires. It was like 4 different questionnaires that were on 4 different, like one of them was a web-based form. Another one was an Excel document. Another one was a Word document. So they were covering the full plethora of different mediums in which they could ask the questions too. And the same thing, again, this is very similar to a third-party risk questionnaire. Some of them were like yes, no, and I was like, well, like there really isn't a yes, no to some of these answers, but sure, I give you an answer. But then, we send it in, and then they came back and they're like, what exactly do you mean here? They're really digging in. And the part they're really digging in on is ransomware, right? So I think that, ransomware has got the insurance industry's attention, and they're spending a lot of time on ransomware specifically because it's running so rampant. I'm sure that most of the issues that it'd be cool to talk to some of the cyber insurance companies to take a look at some of their stats. But my guess is that probably the biggest issue that they're facing is ransomware payouts. So they're doing their due diligence and really weighing in hard on ransomware, and premiums are going way up. So it's more than just it's not just a CYA type of insurance thing anymore. It's a very important thing. Insurance companies are taking it really seriously.
Definitely. When you're having to pay out or answer to $600 million ransoms, it's no joke. It's a serious business. And I can see why they're getting more diligent about it, but makes your job so much harder. So let's finish off with Gary. And we've got just a couple more minutes before the platform shuts us down. Yeah. But go ahead, Gary.
Well, very quickly, I'd have to say ditto to both what Kevin and David said. It's this could take hours to actually discuss. And yes, the premiums have gone up almost exponentially. The questions have gotten a lot more rigorous. Sometimes the questions actually don't make sense as well. And that in of itself can be its own set of challenges when you have to do this back and forth. So I spent upwards of 5 weeks doing this several months ago. So it's a real challenge. Obviously, insurance companies are managing risk, and it's a profit and loss issue for them. And because it's going to get to the point where it simply is going to be a loss leader for the insurance company. So it's a question as to whether or not cyber liability insurance is actually something that's actually of value or not going forward. I think the jury is still out.
Yeah, very good. Well, I want to thank everybody, and I know I just in terms of the cyber insurance topic, I am actually trying to line up panel with CISOs and somebody from the insurance company. So should be sometime in late October or November. So it could be a very interesting conversation, and we'll bring that information also to FutureCon. So I want to thank everybody for their time. And I know the audience, we already just had somebody made a comment saying that these CISOs definitely have their hands on the pulse of the organization. So I think it's a big compliment to all of you. So thank you so much. And we'll throw it back to Kim.